Hello, you're watching Talking Europe. My guest is the dean of one of the very top international relations schools in the world. Arancha Gonzalez Laya leads the Paris School of International Affairs, or PSIA, at Sciences Po University here in Paris, and she was Minister of Foreign and European Affairs in the previous government of Pedro Sanchez, who's currently the Socialist Prime Minister of Spain. She also held top jobs in the European Commission and at the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. As you might expect, she's an avid observer of Europe's efforts to become a more political player on the global stage. Arancha Gonzalez Laya, thank you so much for being my guest.
Always a pleasure.
Let's talk about the opinion polls on the European elections. There's been a lot of comment in France in the last few days about the latest polls showing that the far right, the National Rally, is on around 31% of voting intentions. This is actually very rare because very few lists in the past have exceeded 30% in voting intentions. What do you read into this?
Well, what I read in the latest polls in France is another worrying figure, which is that only 44% of French people will go to the polls, meaning that there is around 60% of the citizens that will simply not vote. And we should be asking ourselves, why is it that 60% of the French citizens will not go to the votes? Bearing in mind that in the last occasion and the last election in 2019, we managed to increase the participation of French citizens by 8 percentage points to reach 50%. So why is it that participation is decreasing? Is it that maybe we are not discussing and debating what French citizens want to debate about?
So you're sort of implying that the people who are most motivated to go and vote are those who are motivated by identity and immigration issues.
Yeah, we are debating a lot wokeism, we're debating a lot demography, we are debating a lot migration, but we are not debating the economy, we are not debating climate change, we are not debating about security and defense issues. We are not, maybe it is, we should ask ourselves, maybe it is that we are not debating what matters to the ordinary citizens.
So what do you think the mainstream parties, where are they going wrong in that case? Because again, to come back to these polls, President Macron's party here on Renaissance is, according to this Harris Interactive poll, on only 17%. What are they failing to do then? Why are they not cutting through? Why are they not getting more people to want to vote? As you were saying, turnout is set to be pretty low.
I mean, I think the camp of those who are working on providing solutions to the citizens have to become much more present and much more forceful in the European debate. They have to put those issues on the table.
How do they become more forceful?
Well, last time the debate was about climate change. And we got a massive increase of European citizens going to the polls because we were talking about what mattered to them. They felt that the elections responded to a big question mark they had, which is how does Europe decarbonize and how does Europe lead an effort to do that internationally, because they felt that climate change was an existential threat to them. Today, the existential threats in Europe are, one, the competitiveness of the European economy, two, is security and defense. So maybe we have to be more pushy in debating these two issues that will be fundamental to Europe taking its destiny in its hands, as opposed to letting this destiny be decided by American citizens going to the polls at the end of this year, or Chinese citizens who don't go to the polls.
Every EU summit, though, talks about European competitiveness, and the one on April the 17th and 18th is talking about, or has been talking about, this new European competitiveness deal. But all of this seems to stay within the sort of institutional bubble. Again, it doesn't cut through to ordinary voters somehow.
But it matters a lot to businesses across the European Union. It matters a lot to businesses in France. There's three things where the EU is less competitive than its big rivals in the US or China, and this is because Europeans are less integrated. First is energy. Energy is too expensive in Europe compared to the US and other jurisdictions. Second is capital markets, our ability to invest the wealth that Europe has. It's not that we don't have wealth, is that this wealth is invested in the US as opposed to being invested in the European Union. And third is technology, because we have two fragmented technology markets in the European Union. So where Europe is strong is where Europe is integrated. Where Europe is weak is where Europe is still too fragmented in little national markets.
And
so we know the answer.
All this talk about taking a tougher line on China, would you say that's impossible? And with this current fragmentation, there's too many different voices at the moment.
No, on trade, the European Union has one voice. It's the voice of the European Commission with 27 member states behind it. This is the beauty of international trade, is that it is an integrated policy in the European Union. So I think trade is important to the European Union. It's not an ideological choice. It's that 2/3 of growth in Europe comes from outside the European Union. This is why trade matters to the EU. This is why international trade matters to the 14% of jobs in France that depend on it, which, by the way, are better paid than jobs that don't depend on exports. Now, today, Europe is squeezed between unfair competition from China and a little bit of unfair competition from the US too. So what Europe, in my view, needs to do is not renounce to the source of growth, but be more assertive in its trade policy, being more forceful in defending its interest, even standing up to China or to the US.
Now, you recently co-authored an article in Foreign Affairs called Trump-Proofing Europe, Preparing for American Abandonment. But is Trump-proofing a long-term project which will come too late for Ukraine?
Well, what we know is that there is a long-term trend in the US, and frankly on this, whether it's President Trump or President Biden, I don't think it will change. The trend will not change. What will change is the attitude of these two presidents towards Europe, much more hostile in the case of Donald Trump, much more cooperative in the case of Biden. This is what we have observed in the last two presidencies. But we know that longer term, the US is becoming more isolationist, which is one of the reasons why Europe needs to take its destiny in its own hands, starting with Ukraine, which is a war that is taking place in the European soil, on the European soil, in Europe, which to me means that Europe is doing what it needs to do to defend Ukraine, but in doing so, defending itself from revisionist powers like Russia is, that is today a threat to Europe and to the European Union.
But all these defense reforms that have been mooted, I mean, they will take a few years to really kick in. So my point was more about, the current needs that Ukraine says it has.
We have to be able to walk on true gum, walk in the short term, providing Ukraine with the means, both economic and military. And on this, Europe, on the economics means it's shown that it puts its money where its mouth is. We have delivered. It's true that in the US, there is a wrangling at the moment in Congress. It's part of the domestic electoral battle. We hope in Europe that the US Congress will side on the side of President Biden and approve the short-term package of support to Ukraine. Also on the military front, which Ukraine tells us that it needs it now. But we also have to do that while we invest longer term in the security and in the defense capabilities of Europe.
I'd like to ask you about the Spanish situation, because we have Catalan regional elections set to take place on May the 12th. We've seen this pro-independence rhetoric hardening. We've had the Catalan president telling the Spanish parliament that a referendum on independence is inevitable. Does this mean we're heading towards a collapse of the coalition government with this nationalist rhetoric?
I think we have to listen very carefully to what the Catalan citizens are saying. In every poll after poll, they are saying they are more concerned about Catalonia fixing its education system, its healthcare system, which are not faring very well today. And these are devolved powers that the Spanish central government has given to this region. It needs improving its energy security. Catalonia has the lowest rate of renewable energy in the entire Spain. So citizens are in the polls are telling us that they are more worried about that and less worried about independence of Catalonia. So maybe, again, Maybe this is, in my view, what will be on the ballots, which is why I think the political parties that will respond to the expectations of Catalan citizens will do well in the next election.
And yet some of the polls suggest that the pro-independence parties might have a majority in the regional parliament after May the 20th. We'll have to see, of course. But again, these identity issues in Catalonia playing out very strongly as across the EU in the context of this election, right?
Yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, again, poll after poll, we see citizens asking the Catalan government to respond to their preoccupations: education, healthcare, energy, fighting the drought that is affecting Catalonia. This is the day-to-day problems that citizens face, which in my view is why political parties who respond to those demands from Catalan citizens will do well in the next Catalan election.
We'll see what happens on May the 12th. Thank you so much for being my guest, Arancha Gonzalez Laya, Dean of the Paris School of International Affairs here in the French capital. Thanks for watching and glad you could join us for this part of Talking Europe.